thanks very much for joining us here at the State Control Centre. The Minister and I are joined by, of course, Andrew Crisp, Tim Weebush from EMV and SES respectively, and Assistant Commissioner David Clayton from Victoria Police joins us today as well. And I'll throw to David in just a moment. Obviously, this very significant flood event continues to unfold. Whilst we've had a reprieve from rain, waters are rising, peaks are being reached, houses are being inundated and communities are being isolated because of these floodwaters. There are a number of updates I want to give you, things that have happened, things that are underway, and then we'll talk about what the community needs to do, the requests that are being made, and some of the choices that people can make to keep themselves safe, and of course keep our emergency services safe. So if I can just go through a number of different points. We have 14 relief centres that are open now. Details of those, addresses of those are on the website. We've got 10 choppers that are up in the air providing both assessment of damage, but also moving people around, moving cargo around to support those affected communities. There are now 55 sandbag collection points that are open across the state. We have a number of ADF requests that are on foot, and I want to thank our partners in the Australian Defence Force, who, for the first time, I think it is genuinely a first. We've had a number of local ADF personnel, particularly supporting communities in central Victoria and northern Victoria, coming out of barracks in the northeast. And I met some of those yesterday, and I just want to thank them for their commitment and for their hard work. We'd expect there'll be 50 or 60 additional ADF experts, if you like, so specialists, who will come and support us in coming days. That's separate, of course, to some of the support we'll need around clean-up and important repair work, but we'll keep you updated on those requests. But that system is working well, and for that support already provided, we're very grateful, and of course that will grow over time. I spoke with the Prime Minister this morning, and he again reiterated the National Government's support for our efforts now, and indeed clean-up and recovery beyond that. The ADF is one part of that, but I thought I would thank them for their extraordinary work to this point. While I'm thanking people, there are literally thousands of SES volunteers and paid staff. All of our emergency services are out there doing amazing work, and I thank each and every one of them, and I thank their families. This is such an impressive thing to see so many people working so hard to keep others safe, and of course those who might not necessarily wear a uniform, who are looking out for each other, providing support and assistance. Thank you so very much. Also, people following advice is the other important, really important way in which people can contribute to the safety, not just to their own safety, but the safety of others also. And I'm sure that our emergency services heads here will have a moment. We'll talk about that in just a moment. I wanted to mention roads. We currently have 344 roads that are closed. That number changes hourly. Major roads are assessed twice per day. There is a number of urgent repair works that have already started. A number of contractors on our big build who we have reached out to provide us with some temporary support to do some significant repair work. That work has already started. Obviously we have to get assessments completed first, see water subside, and then we can get in and do urgent repairs. We may have to go back and redo that work at a later point, but on major arterials, major roads, key roads for local communities, getting them open is the priority. Expense will not be an issue there. We will spend what needs to be spent in order to make sure that communities can be joined up, can be connected as quickly as possible. In terms of emergency payments, some 3,000 Victorians have made important applications for those payments. I again remind anybody who's out of their home because of these floodwaters, emergencypayments.dfh.vic.gov.au, or if internet is an issue for you, 1800 226 226. As I said, 3,000 of those applications have been made, and we will process those payments as fast as we possibly can. That works out just over $2,000 for impacted families, and it's about helping them with somewhere to stay, clothing, food, medicine, all of those basics that are critically important at a very difficult time for them. that support means a lot. We remain in a situation where we have some 500 homes that we know of. In fact, it's 466, so the estimates that were made yesterday about 500 homes with above the floorboards, above the floor flooding. 500, it's actually turned out to be 466, and we think there are still about 500 properties that are isolated, not flooded, but isolated. Those numbers will change. Almost certainly those numbers will grow as we see floodwaters peak in a number of communities, the details of which I'll leave to others to go through today. Just in terms of a couple of other matters, I'm very pleased. Yesterday I wrote to the banks and asked them to take urgent steps to defer or waive, wherever appropriate, mortgage payments and other payments for flood affected families and indeed businesses. And I'm very pleased to see a positive response. Very pleased to see a positive response from those bank CEOs. That's a really important thing that we can do to take some pressure off people. If you know that those payments are not going to have to be made for a little while, then that obviously takes a little bit of pressure off at a very difficult time. So I thank them for their partnership and for their prompt response to the letter that I sent to them yesterday. Just finally, of course, it is my sad duty to have to confirm that a 71-year-old man has been found deceased in the backyard of his property in Rochester. We of course send our deepest sympathies to his family and friends. Rochester is a proud local community, a very tight local community, and they'll all be, I know, saddened to hear of one of their number passing away. I just make the point, we'll stand with that family and all families affected by this, but it just brings home for all of us that this is serious, this is potentially very, very dangerous, and our sympathies are with that family, and hopefully that sends a broader message of just how serious this is, and that's why we're all working as hard as we possibly can to make sure that people are safe. Just finally from me on Mickleham, we continue our discussions with the federal government. They're all unfolding well. We think that we'll have places for around 250 people for multiple weeks, and to that end we have already begun the process of recruiting the necessary staff, between 80 and 100 staff that would be required to support those 250 people, and we will continue to update you on that. Again, I know I just said and finally, but if I could just do one more before I hand over to David. I just want to send a really important thank you out to all of those volunteer groups, all of those charities and others that are supporting people in very difficult circumstances. I know Sikh Volunteers Australia, who can always be found very, very quickly whenever there is difficult times upon any community. They're already out, I think, in Seymour and indeed Benalla. The Victorian Council of Churches are providing support and care, and of course the Red Cross, who we can always count on to be there in times of difficulty. Can I just, on behalf of all Victorians, thank all of those different groups for their compassion, for their care, for their hard work. That makes a real difference to so many Victorians. Now to take us through just some whole range of issues that Victoria Police have been attending to, most notably the number of rescues that have had to be undertaken over the last 24 hours. I'll hand over to Assistant Commissioner Clayton, but I will, before I do that, just again make the point, please do not drive into floodwater. Please, if you are asked to evacuate, heed that advice. I know it's very difficult, I know it's very challenging, but your safety is our #1 concern, and indeed the safety of those who may have to come and rescue you. That has got to be our #1 concern, and will be throughout this event. I'll now throw to Assistant Commissioner Clayton.
Thank you, Premier. I can report that emergency services agencies have responded to over 350 rescues during this flood event. Of those rescues, more than 200 have been to homes, 150 to people driving through floodwaters, and 10 to capsized tinnies. In relation to evacuation warnings, our message is to ask you to heed that warning and to evacuate. The consequences of not heeding the warning have been seen in some areas where we've responded to those homes that were asked to evacuate and we've had to rescue people. In terms of driving through flooded waters, there are many roads that are closed and we ask you not to drive through those roads. It's not a time to go four-wheel driving and sightseeing. We're here to help, and I just want to talk you through what a rescue looks like. So a standard rescue in a boat has a crew of 3 skilled operators who will respond to a rescue. If it's a swiftwater rescue, we have 8 personnel involved in every rescue who are highly skilled technically and trained to a high level. But they are difficult and dangerous rescues that sometimes, most often, can be avoided. A rescue involving a helicopter has 4 operators: a pilot, a winch operator, a person who will go down the winch, and also a flight operator. Often that can be a perilous activity, given the weather conditions and the environment they're trying to rescue somebody from. We've seen examples where we've rescued people from vehicles where they should not have entered that swift moving water. We've had a rescue of a truck driver in really difficult circumstances where there were power lines and those operators were at peril because somebody chose to drive through floodwaters. So we would ask you to make sure you drive to the conditions and heed the warnings that are provided. Police remain in areas that are evacuated to ensure that there is no looting. We have no reports of looting and there will be zero tolerance to any looting. We anticipate that in coming days we're going to see some of the largest evacuations that we have ever seen. So please heed those warnings and evacuate when you're asked to. Thank you.
Good morning everybody, Tim Weebush from Vic SES. I'm going to cover off on what our flood risks are over the coming days, starting in the west of the state. So the Wimmera River is currently at major flood level at 5 metres around Glenorchy, and that is just below what we saw as the record flood in January 2011. That flood water will move downstream early next week, and on Monday at Horsham we will see low-end major flooding at around 3.7 metres. Then if we go across to the Avoca catchment, today we're expecting to see major flood warning to occur around Charlton. An evacuation warning was issued for Charlton yesterday, and again we can't emphasise enough that when we issue an evacuation warning, that is serious. We are asking people to leave and not stay in their homes. We're expecting levels just below what we saw in 2010, which is below the record flood of 2011. Then if we go across to the Campaspe, on the Campaspe River last night we saw at Rochester at peak at 115.7 AHD. That's 300 millimetres above the record flood of January 2011. Sadly, last night, as you've just heard from Assistant Commissioner Clayton, we had 160 rescues in and around Rochester for people that had chosen to stay and not leave despite the evacuation warnings. We're going to see further evacuation warnings on the Campaspe River at Echuca later today and into Sunday. Again, for the community at Echuca, you need to be ready and preparing to evacuate in parts of Echuca. Also for Echuca there will be a second peak, and that will be coming from the Murray River, and that will be mid to late next week. So for Echuca residents, the first peak is later today into Sunday from the Campaspe River, and then the Murray River midweek to the end of the week. If we go around to the Goulburn River, as we've seen at Seymour, we saw that record peak of 8.26 metres. That has fallen yesterday to 7.4 metres. Goulburn Valley Water are now releasing further inflows out of the Ilden Dam, and that will see the major flood level go back up to around about 7.5 metres and will sustain at that level for a couple of days. But we're certainly not expecting it to go anywhere near what the peak was at 8.26 metres. That floodwater though is moving downstream, and there's evacuation warnings now in place for Murchison. Murchison has already started to reach the major flood level and will continue to peak over the next 24 hours. The water then moves from there down to Orvale and Kyalla West, where major flooding is expected to start today and through the weekend. And then that floodwater will reach Shepparton on the Goulburn, but join up with the flooding that's been occurring on the Broken River and Severn and Castles Creek. With those three rivers combining, we're expecting to see a flood height of around 12 metres between Shepparton and Mooroopna, commencing around lunchtime today and moving to a peak on Tuesday. Again, an evacuation warning is out for Mooroopna, Shepparton, Kyalla and also Murchison right now. Now is the time to leave. We're going to see flood levels on the Goulburn where it meets at Shepparton with the Broken and Severn Castles Creek that is equivalent to 1974. These are record flood levels. And over the coming days, all of this water is going to continue to move towards the Murray River. If we go around then to the Ovens and King, which combine at Wangaratta. At Wangaratta, we're expecting a peak this morning of 12.8 metres. An evacuation message is out for a part of Wangaratta around what is called the Parfitt Road levee. At the moment, we've had geotechs out there this morning checking that levee. It is structurally sound, people are safe, but again, if you're behind that levee, the message at the moment is to be out of that area until those floodwaters start to subside. At Mount Emu Creek, good news in the southwest of the state at Skipton, where we've seen that flood peak occur. There has been inundation of some properties in and around the township of Skipton, but it is now receding. On the Barwon River, we're seeing the convergence of the Lee and the Barwon rivers at Geelong. We're expecting moderate flood levels just below major, which means our sporting grounds there, caravan parks and some properties, around a dozen, will be impacted by floodwaters into this weekend. And then finally, across the metropolitan area, the Maribyrnong River has now dropped just below minor flood level. The evacuation warning was lifted this morning with a safe to return message now current. There is a community meeting for Maribyrnong residents at 12 o'clock today where you can get information on relief and recovery services, but also some of the safe to return actions that you can take. On the Werribee River, we're expecting minor flooding to continue for another couple of days into early next week. And finally, on the Yarra River, we're seeing moderate flooding in the upper reaches from Yarra Glen through to Coldstream, and again that is likely to continue at that level for a couple of days. As these floodwaters do start to recede, you will start to see those evacuation messages removed and a safe to return message replacing it. When you see those messages, that is where you need to think about what you will need to do before you can go back into your property. If your property has seen floodwaters inside, you need to be checking your gas and electrical services by a professional. So be thinking about and working through who that might be now. We're advising people to make sure you're wearing strong boots and gloves. Don't go back there in basic footwear and other clothing. Be prepared for the conditions that you might find at your property. And again, 1800 226 226 is the Victorian hotline for any services that you may need to access information from, whether it's flood warnings through to relief and to recovery. I'm now going to pass over to Commissioner Chris to round us out.
Thanks very much, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Our emergency services and our key partners, we are so focused on keeping Victorians safe, whether that's in the response phase as these rivers peak, or where now people have moved to relief centres and might be in those centres for a number of days. So we are very, very focused on what that looks like and how we do that. We've talked about what the weather has been over the last few days, and we've touched on what the weather might look like in the coming week. Some of that is firming up at this stage, so in effect what we will see now over the next few days is fairly stable weather. But once we move into Wednesday, it looks as though we will see another low pressure system start to impact on the east coast of Australia, but more New South Wales and into Victoria. It will draw down on that tropical moisture. So into Wednesday night, we could see falls in the northwest, maybe moving into central Victoria around that sort of 2 to 10 mil. There could be some storm activity, and we could see some heavier falls around 20 mil. As we move into Thursday, we could see rainfall increasing, so sort of 5 to 10 mil as it moves across into central Victoria and touching on the northeast. And we could see in that storm activity localised falls up to 20 to 30 mil. When we move into Friday, it's moving more across to the northeast, and on those northeastern ranges, we could see rainfall up to 50 mil. So on the top of what we've already got, we are very focused on what that means for us, and we're doing that modelling at the moment. So this is early days, and that will firm up over the next few days, but it is so important for us to continue to focus our thinking and our planning. And we're very much doing that. We know with the scenario that's been described by the various speakers, it's about what the Murray will look like, and then what we will see something similar to 2010-11 with that sort of slow-moving flood situation. We need support to do that, and we've got great support across Victorian agencies, and the Premier did touch on the fact that we do have good local support from the ADF at this point in time, coming out of barracks in the northeast of the state. We will be formalising some of those arrangements today. We're submitting a request for assistance to the Commonwealth. We'll be looking at some additional support around planners and logisticians, and some other resources to support us in relation to evacuation and relief activities. So again, this is all about we work as one, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Victorian agency or our Commonwealth partners. We're all in this to keep our Victorians safe. Thank you.
We're happy to take any questions you have.
Can we ask the Assistant Commissioner, if we can, what more details you can give us surrounding the circumstances of the body being found in Rochester?
Yeah, so sadly the 71-year-old male was found drowned this morning. Victoria Police are preparing a report for the coroner, so at this stage investigations are very early. It's believed he was located in his backyard, but I've no further detail at this stage.
Have police been able to get there themselves?
The SES are on scene, and Victoria Police are endeavouring to get on scene at the moment.
Yeah, so how hard, in other words, will it be for that investigation?
Well, it's very difficult circumstances due to the amount of flood water that is present there at the moment.
I don't know whether this question should be directed towards Mr. Weebush or Mr. Chris, but I'll ask, there's a lot of local anger around Maribyrnong regarding the wall at Flemington Racecourse. Can either of you offer any insight into what role that has played and whether the anger is justified?
I guess the situation we saw with the Maribyrnong River was something that we started talking about on Tuesday last week. So that's where we were in these media conferences in the first instance starting to alert communities as to the risk of flooding. There was door knocking that was undertaken of around 150 properties in and around that Maribyrnong area. As we moved into Thursday, watch and act messages were put into place for the Maribyrnong, where that message is all about monitoring your local conditions and being prepared to act should the conditions change. What we then saw was significant rainfall on Thursday in the upper reaches of that catchment that has resulted in a very swift flow coming down the Maribyrnong. That coincided with the high tide, and at that point, that's when the modelling then, I guess, indicated that there was a risk of major flooding in and around that community. So just after 4 a.m, there was emergency warnings put into place. There were phone alert messages that were put out to an area much wider than that area of 150 properties that were originally door knocked. And that was to alert people to the fact that the situation had changed and it was now time to evacuate in that area. There'd been sandbagging going on in that area at the Anglers Tavern for several days. The community was aware, the community was advised for several days that there was certainly a risk of flooding on the Maribyrnong. And obviously we do appreciate that it's now difficult for around about 125 properties that have seen water inundation.
But in regards to that wall at the Flemington Racecourse, have your local members indicated to you in the past that it could be a problem, and there is a lot of local anger at the moment, particularly when they see the pictures of the Flemington being untouched and the other side being so badly affected. So is there justification in the local anger, and have there been local concerns about that for a while?
Look, the levee that exists around the Maribyrnong River is there on both sides, and it's also around the racecourse. Whether that has contributed to some of the flooding is something probably that we will need to refer to Melbourne Water to talk through how that plays out hydrologically. But what we do know is that when that water reaches that area, we've got flood warnings and things where the modelling takes into account all of those structures that are in place, whether it's levees or the like. And I can only say again, for all Victorians, we are now in a situation where our catchments are saturated, our water storages are full. Anytime we see significant rainfall, and in this case we saw 150 millimetres of rain over the Maribyrnong catchment, we need to be prepared for moderate to major flooding when that occurs.
And just one final question on that. Have your local SES representatives in the past made any representations to you or anyone else in emergency services that they are concerned about that wall and the effect it would have on the flood?
To the best of my knowledge, certainly not in my time as Chief Officer have I been made aware of a challenge, particularly with the levee wall at Flemington.
Volunteers at Puts Grey SES this morning said they are severely under-resourced and underfunded. Do you think more resources need to be put into that station?
Look, I guess the SES right across the state, our volunteers have been doing a fantastic job over the last 2 years, let alone just this last week. They've responded to over 2,500 requests for assistance. Every request that has been made of SES has been able to be responded to. We've always got resources that are available to be brought in from other areas. No SES unit on their own will be able to respond to the magnitude of some of the events that we're seeing. And so we consistently move resources around the state to wherever the action is at the particular time. So if you're in Bendigo today, Rochester last night, Charlton tomorrow, Shepparton into this weekend, you will see SES units from all parts of Victoria that are providing services and support into those areas, along with our CFA, the Shepparton Search and Rescue Squad if you're in Shepparton, Echuca Moama Search and Rescue Squad if you're at Echuca, along with Forest Fire Management Victoria, local councils. This is not just about SES doing it on its own.
Have any of those members relayed concerns to you?
Look, I guess our units are always keen to be resourced to a level that will be able to support their community more often, and there are grant programs, there is funding arrangements that are put in place to continue to build our capability. And yes, we continue to work with the government about the needs that we have for our growing services as we're seeing these increasing numbers of storm and flood events year on year.
Is this a political issue? They've claimed that they don't get the funding they need being the safe like to see.
Emergency support, so support to emergency services is allocated on need. And whilst I don't have for you a detailed breakdown of all the additional funding that the SES has received over our time in government, I'm more than happy to get that for you. And frankly, claims about safe seats or marginal seats is just wrong. It's just absolutely wrong. You know, I was in a chopper yesterday touring over communities that do not have a long track record of supporting my side of politics, but we're there because that's our job. This is not about politics. It's about keeping people safe. That's always been my approach, whether it's this or fires or pandemic. Our job is to keep people safe, and that's what we will do. There's nothing political about this at all.
Premier, did you consider declaring a state of emergency?
The process for states of disaster and emergency are well understood, and that relates to the Emergency Management Commissioner providing advice to me that the Minister for Emergency Services should be given quite extraordinary powers. That advice is provided only when those powers are needed, and no such advice has been provided, and Commissioner Chris went to that yesterday in some detail. That's something we look at in an ongoing way, and if that advice changes, then we won't hesitate to declare emergency or disaster, but that declaration or the absence of that is not relevant to any of the work that's being done. Everyone's working together, everybody is pitching in, and I'm so grateful to everybody who's doing that. The most important point in many respects is when warnings are provided, please give due consideration to those warnings. The last thing we want to do is to have to rescue more and more people from their roofs. That's not good for them. It's very dangerous for them, and it's also very dangerous for the people who have to come to your aid. And as Assistant Commissioner Clayton just indicated, it's not one person coming and rescuing you. It's quite a large number, and it can be really dangerous. So we'll look at those matters, and if that advice is provided, then we'll act on it.
Premier, your government has had a stance not to build new dams. Do you think, given climate change risks, increased population in Melbourne, bigger rain events, is there any likelihood that that will change so that, I guess, water can pool and be protected from residential areas, specifically around Melbourne?
Yeah, I'm not here to make any announcements about additional dams. No, that's our policy has been to make the best and most efficient use of the water that we have, as well as to create a climate change resistant capacity to be able to create water. We, through channeling through the water grid, through desal and all manner of other investments, that's how we will make sure that we have enough water. I must say though, my focus at the moment is not on adequacy of water supplies for the future. It's about making sure that we keep people safe in what is a really significant flood event. And as you see, our storages are full, and they are then beyond that, the ground is sodden right across our state, and that means even a moderate rainfall event is very, very significant. So this is not about storages, this is about patterns of weather that are unique, and again, I don't really want to get into a climate change debate and discussion. I don't think that really serves any purpose at the moment. My record on those matters is very clear.
And in 2007, you're a member of the government that was, I guess, approved the wall around Flemington, and there's been a lot of anger about that. Do you think after this event that needs to be looked at, given some of the, I guess, community concerns about the fact the racecourse has been protected and that may have...
Sure. As Tim's just indicated, we're happy to let Melbourne Water speak to that. They'd be the people who would be best positioned to do that.
Have you been made aware of the
No,
local angle?
no, I have not.
Have you seen the...
Yeah, I've seen some. Yeah, but I've not. But that matter's not been raised with me. But I'm more than happy to chase it up for you.
So you would look for the Melbourne Racing Club chairman to, I guess, be bragging online about the wall's success?
Well, that's a matter for the chairman of the Melbourne Racing Club.
Do you think it's a good look?
Well, I'm not here to indicate what's a good or a bad look. Like, I'd be here all day, wouldn't I? Seriously. My job at the moment and every day is to make sure that we keep people safe. And let's not lose sight of the fact that we have people out of their homes, absolutely, and we need to support them. And we've got other communities. These waters are rising, and having been up looking at some of these flood affected communities yesterday, and I'll be back out again today, that water is moving fast and there will be many people who've got to evacuate, and my focus is on providing them with support and assistance and keeping them safe. Beyond that, I'm happy to have Melbourne Water come back to you about that particular issue, and there's probably not much more that I can add.
Is there an early estimate?
Sorry?
I was just going to say, is there an early estimate of what the total insurance bill could be like?
No, we've still got people up in the air right now making assessments about damage and impact. That'll, once waters recede, those assessments will continue on the ground as well. And then there are disaster funding arrangements that kick in partnership with the Commonwealth Government. There'll be other private insurance claims that are made as well, personal insurance claims that are made, but there'll be a very, very big bill. And I want to assure all of those communities that we will be there to provide them with the support and assistance they need as families, as businesses, and in terms of, as a local community, replacing bridges, upgrading roads, dealing with all the damage. We just need favourable conditions to do that, and that's been a really big challenge for us pre this flood event, where we've had just so much rainfall that so much of our planned maintenance has not been able to be done. But crews are out on the ground now, and urgent repairs are being made to more significant roads, although I do accept that every road is significant if it's the way you get where you need to be. But that work, and we're pulling some people out of our big build. They've agreed, some of those bigger construction firms, to form up smaller crews to go and do that work, and I'm very grateful to them. Just one thing I forgot to mention earlier on, you'll recall yesterday, at various points yesterday and the day before, we had many thousands of properties, many thousands of customers that were without power. I'm very pleased to be able to report that there's now just 155 customers who don't have power. A small number of those are power dependent. We're working with them, but thank you to all those crews that have been out there from the various power companies doing that work, with obviously support from emergency services as well. That number may change, but essentially all but a very small number of those who've been without power now have power back on, and that's very, very important.
You mentioned earlier you've been in contact with the banks. You've also been in contact with the insurance companies.
Yes.
What have they told you?
Yeah, so through the Insurance Council of Australia, whenever we have one of these issues, they're some of the first calls that we make, just to ensure that they have additional assessors, they have additional staff, that they're ready to turn around insurance claims as fast as possible, and they've given us an assurance that they have done that, they've taken those steps, and we will remain in contact with them, and if there's any support that we can provide to them to in turn support their customers, then of course we stand ready to do that. But the response from the Insurance Council has been very strong.
Have they indicated they've already got people out in the field?
Not necessarily out in the field, but they are ready and they know and understand that quick assessments are the best. That's how we get people the money they need to be able to rebuild. Of course, we'll be just as urgent in terms of the payments that we make at this stage. It's about support for people who are out of their home, and then different intergovernmental, so state and national government disaster payments will become available, resettlement as well as clean up. That's all basically ahead of us, and we'll move to that in coming days.
I have a question about the evacuations in Echuca.
I'm sure that Tim is the perfect person to take you through that.
Just about those evacuations in the next 24 to 48 hours, whether it be Echuca or Shepparton, and how extensive will they be? How many people do you intend to door knock, and how many people are you going to have looking for alternate accommodation?
So the Campaspe River peaked at major flood level, which was 300 millimetres above what we saw in January 2011 at Rochester overnight, and is still steady at that level now. So we're going to see very similar levels downstream at Echuca in the next 24 hours, and then for the subsequent 48 hours. So there's been community meetings there yesterday. There's community meetings scheduled again for today at Echuca. There are relief centres that are set up there. They're currently assessing exactly what areas will need to be evacuated, but the information I have is that there will be a significant part of Echuca that will be asked to evacuate, most likely just after lunchtime today, ahead of those peak waters that are expected overnight tonight and through the subsequent days.
It's a town with Moama of more than 15,000 people. Do you know what sort of percentage of people need to...
No, I don't have the exact percentage at the moment. As I said, that information is fairly new this morning based on the peak. We've got to wait for those peaks to occur at the gauges upstream, which is obviously what did occur last night at Rochester, and so that's now being modelled so that we're effectively warning all of those communities. However, there is an emergency warning already out for the Echuca community, and that means you need to be alert to your conditions and need to be preparing to evacuate, particularly if you're in areas within some distance of the river. Don't expect that just because you might be a kilometre or two away that it won't impact you. There are other watercourses, there are other streams that could also be seeing backflow from the major streams in those locations. And as we've seen, very flat land in the north parts of the state, and it does spread out quite significantly. And that's what we'll also see at Shepparton and Mooroopna in particular, where we will see major flood level of 12 metres that will affect up to 4,000 properties.
And with Echuca, are you expecting the floodwaters from the Campaspe to go down before it's also hit by floodwaters from the Murray next week?
No, we're expecting that major flood level is likely to coincide then with the convergence of the Murray River potentially being at major flood level mid next week at Echuca as well. So we may see a very slight receding of floodwaters around Echuca ahead of that. It really is a timing issue now, but we've got inflows coming in from the Mitter rivers and the King and the Ovens that will also feed in. And so that's where it's a very delicate situation in a location like Echuca where there's multiple rivers that coincide.
So people who evacuate may have to evacuate. We're talking over a week, aren't we? Because by the time all those rivers flow in.
Absolutely, and that's what we've been sharing in those communities through the community meetings yesterday, will be again today, providing as much information as we can. Many of our community meetings are also being streamed online because we are aware that road closures make it difficult for some, particularly the outlying areas, being able to get into some of these community meetings.
I'll just say that's where that's where Mickleham becomes quite an important additional tool for us to use. 250 is the initial stand-up. We can potentially go to another 250, and we're recruiting the staff right now to be able to use that for this purpose. There's also a whole lot of other logistics that need to go into that, buses to get people from their community down to Mickleham. We look forward to updating you further on that tomorrow, but all preparations are being made so that that facility can be used. It won't be for everybody, but for some communities particularly, where there's not a local option, a friends and family option, because say they're flooded out as well. This would be an option, particularly for when you're not out of your home for a day or two, you may be there for longer, then all of a sudden that National Resilience Centre at Mickleham becomes a really important additional tool for us. So all the work is being done across our government and the Commonwealth Government to make that ready, and there'll be further updates beyond what I've already given you today, and we'll give those to you as soon as we can.
Do you have an idea at the moment when that will be open?
We're working as hard as we can to make sure that it's open as soon as possible. I'll have a clearer picture of that tomorrow.
Yourself and the Minister went up in the chopping yesterday. Can you talk us through how widespread the damage was? Was it worse than you were expecting?
Oh, look, I think we all know that this is a very, very significant flood event. To see water, such volumes of water is always very confronting. To then also see fast-moving water as well. We went to the Incident Control Centre at Shepparton, and again I want to give a shout out to all of those. There's literally every uniform you can imagine, everyone from the ADF through all of our emergency services, volunteers, career, people from the Catchment Management Authority. Great team effort, really great team effort, and everybody working together, as well as local government. The Mayor and the CEO of the Council was there as well, the independent member for Shepparton, Susanna Shee, was there as well. And the reason you go to these places is to simply say, is there anything you need? And I ask that question of just about everybody. The good news is people have got what they need now. Those needs will change though as we move from this emergency response to then into obviously relief's already started, and then that clean up and recovery phase. And I want to assure that community and every flood affected community will be there to rebuild roads and bridges, to help people clean up their houses, to advocate to the insurance industry, for instance, to make quick claims and also pay out quick claims, I should say, and also the intervention that we took yesterday with the banks. And again, not often that I'd be thanking banks for things, but I am very pleased that they have responded very quickly. That's just one thing that can be taken off people's minds. They've got enough to worry about now. If you're out of your house and if you're in really difficult circumstances, if you can get some reprieve on your mortgage, well, that just gives you some room. And I think that's welcome news, and I thank those bank CEOs for that very prompt and positive response.
Was the desalination plant in operation during this flood?
Last order was cancelled, so the last order was cancelled. Any other issues? If not, thanks to everybody who's out there doing an amazing job, and please, please do not drive into flood water. Dangerous for you and dangerous for the people that will come and rescue you. Thanks very much, everyone.